the social sciences, the humanities run on an oppressor-victim narrative. And everything is seen through that light. And you can learn the tenets of the oppressor-victimizer narrative in 5 minutes. And then you can explain the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and by the way, there's a very healthy dose of narcissism thrown into the whole thing, which is that to the extent that any students in American universities get taught anything about the Middle East, they will be taught Edward Said's claim of Orientalism, which, of course, is a claim that is, by Said's own admission, spilled way beyond even the claims that he made in his book. Said's insight, if you can call it that, was that when Westerners approached the Arab and Muslim world, they did so through the eyes of Westerners, which is an observation so banal that only the academy could extrapolate out a whole course from it. I mean, what eyes were
especially without giving some due credit to the fact of Western eyes.
Well, people when Napoleon goes to Egypt, one of the things he does is to order a massive catalogue of all of the riches and treasures of ancient Egypt, a catalogue which Egypt itself had not produced to that point.
Right.
And one of the people who Napoleon gets on to do this, and who founds the Cairo Museum, by the way, ends up also being one of the people who breaks the code of the Rosetta Stone, giving the lost languages back to the region. But anyway, people don't need to know any of that.
Another detail.
That's all just,
it's another detail.
Why do you need to know that when you can say, this is what Said really
Western eyes who defined ancient artifacts as treasures to begin with.
Right.
Right. Then it becomes self-evident. Right.
But just consider the enormously advantageous aspect of narcissism to this mix, because the narcissistic thing that Said helped to give American and other Western students was nothing in the world happens unless you in the West make it happen. You make it so. The Palestinians, like all the Arabs, the Muslim world, the developing world as a whole, does nothing of its own volition. It can't even make mistakes on its own dime. It's you that made them do it. What did we in America do to cause this? Is the lens, the only lens through which an American student will be taught to look at the world. Why is this happening in China? What did we do to China? Will be the way, but everything is interpreted. So this is just not fit for purpose for understanding the world, but it's hugely narcissistic because, among other things, and you can see this in the spilling out of protests across American and other Western campuses. One of the things I say at one point in the book is, what level of delusion and narcissistic delusion do you have to be in to think that you, at the University of Columbia or Berkeley or Yale, or Princeton, or Oxford, can dictate war policy 2 continents away? Who was waiting for your opinion exactly?
It's an extension.
In counter-terrorism strategy in densely built-up urban areas. When you say that your university is central to the funding of Israel's war, what do you mean? What do you mean? What, you at your campus is at the center of the war? Really? Really? You're at the center of world events by sitting in the middle of your quadrangle in a tent?
What if I told you there's a tiny nutrient missing from your body that could potentially change everything about how you feel? Well, if you've ever wondered why you're feeling sluggish, sleeping poorly, or aging faster than you'd like, the answer might be simpler than you think. That's where Fatty 15 comes in. Our cells need essential nutrients to stay healthy, and most of us are deficient in one critical one, C15. Fatty 15 is a science-backed, award-winning, pure, vegan-friendly C15 supplement with just one ingredient, and it has 3 times more cellular benefits than omega-3 or fish oil. Plus, it's free from flavors, allergens, and preservatives. C15 is the only ingredient in Fatty 15, 100% pure. And unlike fish oil supplements that oxidize quickly, Fatty 15 naturally resists breakdowns both in bottle and in your body. Fatty 15 works by replenishing your cells with C15, which repairs cellular damage, boosts energy production, and activates your body's natural repair mechanism for better sleep, mood, metabolism, and heart health. Plus, it comes in a beautiful, reusable glass and bamboo jar with eco-friendly refills delivered quarterly. Fatty 15 is on a mission to replenish the C15 levels in your body and restore your long-term health. You can get an additional 15% off their 90-day subscription starter kit by going to fatty15.com/Peterson. Fatty 15, essential nutrition for healthier cells and a healthier you.
Let me put a twist on that and tell me what you think. So it seems to me that the Pride story is slightly, perhaps, more complicated than the tale that you laid out. So there's this initial presumption of Western centrality, let's say, that you pointed to. But see, one of the things I saw at the University of Toronto shortly before it became impossible for me to work there was this insistence by my colleagues that there was no moral pathway, no more productive and moral pathway that a student could be invited to take than the pathway of protest.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Yep. So now it's not only that the students are characterized by this overweening certainty in Western, what would you say?
Dominance and malevolence.
Yes. It's that so they posit this malevolent force that's centered in the West, but then they position themselves as adversaries to that force, and that's the prideful twist.
Well,
it's like, we're so horrible here in the West, but I'm so good that even though I'm part of the West, I'll do everything I can to oppose that. And then they're egged on by their idiot professors.
I quote a student at Columbia who described himself as a first-generation low-income student, the first in his family to go to university, certainly the first to go to Columbia. You would have thought, most of us would have thought, damn, I'm lucky. Mm-hmm. But he describes how straight away he was taught what he described as the rich history of protest at Columbia, and remembered thinking, when it kicks off again, I want to be at the center of it.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know about you, but I think student days should be used for many things. But the idea that you should make yourself central to the protest movements of your time as your demonstration of virtue in your years of study that's taught. That's taught. That young man was taught that.
Definitely.
It's because
by the culture too.
By the
not
culture.
Just by
it's because the professors at totally pointless studies institutes and other things, and sometimes in serious programs, are actually telling their students this. There are a number of former faculty of Columbia that I've spoken to, and some present still, who say this to me. They say, we were teaching this for years. This was all being boiled up by us, by the faculty, for years ahead of this. But the other thing that happens then, just to add to your riff on the sin of it, is that, as you know, one of the conclusions I come to about this is that this has been projection on a vast scale. And it really took talking with quite a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists about this phenomenon in the last 18 months to work this out. There's this rule, as you know, that I go into in the book that I've mulled on a lot, that I got from the great Soviet Jewish writer Vasily Grossman, who appears intermittently throughout the book. And Vasily Grossman had this terrific dictum in the middle of Life and Fate where he says, tell me what you accuse the Jews of, I'll tell you what you're guilty of. This is unbelievably relevant again and again and again. The Iranian Revolutionary Government says that the Jewish state is a colonialist enterprise. The Iranian Revolutionary Government is colonizing the Middle East since 1979.
There's nothing colonist about Islam.
Oh, no. I mean,
it was only the fastest growing empire in the history of the world.
And as you know, Muhammad, when he spread Islam, only did through by persuasion and kindness.
Right. And that still obtains today. We'll get back to that.
But every time this I mulled on this subject in recent years, the Grossman's rule absolutely applied. People using the Jewish state, just as they have the Jewish people throughout history, as a projection mechanism for their own failings. And the place where I realized this became very relevant to the American university and the Western universities was, what were the things the students were accusing the Jewish state of? Genocide, ethnic cleansing, white supremacy. So you would laugh at that one. They've never been to Israel.
That's a good one.
But anyway, so ethnic cleansing, genocide, white supremacy, the various sins that they will always lob at Israel, and they were throwing this at Israel from October the 7th, as they had in the years before, but they really got a push on it after that. And I was thinking throughout this period, as I saw the protests in the West, I thought, why are these terms so familiar? The conclusion I came to was, and it actually was a follow-on from my previous book, The War on the West, where I talked about what was being taught to a generation. And as you know, one of the things I said in that book was, we are teaching young people born in the 21st century in America and the rest of the West that they are guilty by dint of being born here. Mm-hmm. You are guilty of colonialism because some of your ancestors may have engaged in colonialism. You're guilty of genocide. You carry the guilt of genocide because 300 years ago, people who may not be ancestors of yours but looked like you did this thing, and so on and so on. And I said in The War on the West that this was a very, very dangerous thing because it's a mechanism of guilt with no alleviation mechanism for forgiveness. There's no way to alleviate the guilt. Mm-hmm. You're just being told you're guilty and you're stuck with it.
Mm-hmm. Now you can see the protests as a manifestation of that attempt to expiate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One of the conclusions I come to is that this protest movement has been projection on a vast scale. The students accuse Israel of things that the students have been told that they themselves are guilty of. Mm-hmm. That they themselves,
they see Israel as the vanguard of Western colonialism.
Exactly.
It's the whole story.
So this is a giant mechanism of projection, which is why I say when it comes to these protesters, particularly the students in the West, I say, tell me what you accuse the Jewish state of. I'll tell you what you were taught you're guilty of. Mm-hmm.
Right, of course.
You were taught that you're guilty of.
Yeah. And no wonder that people rebel against that, because how the hell else are they going to expiate the guilt?
Absolutely. But here is a way.
Yeah.
And with the added thing that the Iranian proxies across the West, the Qatari money that has flooded through Western universities, not least American universities,
the
propagandists, the organized movements. It's not an accident that the same movement crops up everywhere with exactly the same slogans. That, is it generic that students at Princeton again the other week are chanting "Glory to our martyrs"? This is totally imported propaganda just placed over them, and these dolts repeat and repeat and repeat. But all of this has been done so expertly because it plays to the psychological weakness that exists in so many people in the West who have been taught their guilt, have been taught culpability with no means of getting rid of it. But here you have a means.
Culpability with no virtue. That's one of the most striking examples of that, I believe, is, I was probably 40 bloody years old before I knew who Wilberforce was.
Right.
To my eternal shame, it's all part and parcel of the message that the Western colonial powers were responsible for slavery, when the truth of the matter is that the Great Britain in particular, waged war for 175 years on the high seas to eradicate slavery for the first time in history?
We not only eradicated, the British, not only eradicated it in the British Empire, but eradicated it on all the high seas.
Right.
And lost thousands of sailors throughout the 19th century. And every British household paid far more in household goods throughout the 19th century because we weren't trading with slave traders.
Right.
Compare that, by the way, to the fact that
there's
at the same
reparations.
At the same time, the Islamic world was gloriously still slaving away, and much of the Islamic world still does, by the way, across Africa and the Middle East, is still doing slaving. So
unrepentantly and with no apology whatsoever.
But positively beaming that at the same time they can teach people in the West that Westerners born in the 21st century are guilty of 18th century slaving. So this is a an extraordinarily dangerous moment, it seems to me, because the ground that you and I and others have identified for many years of deracination of populations, demoralization of populations, stripping away of all legitimate heroes or ignorance of them, whether it's Wilberforce or Churchill or anyone else, that the stripping away of the heroes, stripping away of the national story in country after country across the West leaves this vacuum.
Canada leading the pack, perhaps.
Canada, perhaps the world leader.
Australia, New Zealand, they could compete.
They're doing very, very well.
They are.
But into this vacuum, something was always going to step. And there is no reason why American or other Western universities or streets, because it's not just at higher education institutions, it's, Union Station in New York shut down again the other week by hundreds of people chanting for Intifada.
Yeah.
Intifada terrorism in the center of New York. What it is there's no reason why this death cult ideology should find itself worshipped in the free West, apart from the fact that we have allowed ourselves to be deracinated and demoralized and allowed the weakest and most pernicious imaginable ideology to step into the vacuum.